They're not talking about the best of them. They're just talking about the rest of them. Not the worst parts, but the best parts. This is the best of the rest.
Hello, and pretty soon you're going to get hair in funny places and you're going to start thinking about girls. This is Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at superhero movies that were poorly received upon release, but only talk about the things we liked and what the movie does well. It is sometimes a challenge, but always a good time. And this week we are talking Spawn. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined as always by comic book prodigy Andrew Williams. You ready to dive into this one, Andrew?
I am very ready. This is a heavily requested episode.
Yes, surprisingly so. I've heard like Hulk and Daredevil a lot. But if I explain, I got a podcast, this is the concept, like, oh, like Daredevil, oh, like Hulk, I hear those a lot. And then there's also been this kind of surge of requests for Spawn. We've got direct emails about it. Friends have asked us about it. So we always had planned on recording this episode. It's on our long list of movies we're going to cover, but we definitely bumped it up the schedule once we started having people share their thoughts on it. An oddly popular movie with a certain crowd. It has its defenders. I'll say that.
It does.
What's your story with this movie? Did you see it in theaters? Did you watch it a lot growing up? See it on TV?
No.
No to all of the above?
No, it came out when I was 10, and my parents kind of saw the, thematic imagery of the film and saw that as problematic.
I definitely, for my entire life until this week, I thought this was a rated R movie.
I did too. I really did too.
I was watching it this week and I was like, there's not nudity, there's not gore, there's not even foul language, which I assumed there would be. I mean, there's foul language, but not the curse words that would give you an R rating. So after the movie ended, I looked it up and I was like, wow, that's PG-13. It was released as PG-13. And when it hit home video, there was an R cut released as well, known as the director's cut, which seems to be maybe the more popular version of the movie. It is 40 minutes longer. It is not the version that we watched. Maybe one day it'll give us an excuse to revisit it. But we're talking about the theatrical cut of Spawn, the one that was released August 1st of 1997. Andrew, in 97, we get Batman and Robin, we get Spawn, and we get Steel. We're 2 of 3 so far. Something tells me we're going to hit that third one at some point. Yeah.
Well, we're going to get the trifecta. Don't you fans worry.
What a year. This movie had a budget of $45 million. At the box office, it brings in only $88 million, possibly covering its production cost and marketing, but definitely not bringing in any kind of significant profits for the studio. At Rotten Tomatoes, its rating is 17%. Pretty low. There's only a handful of movies we've covered so far that are below 20%. But like I said, this movie has its defenders. And I guess today we're going to be among them, because what we do on this show is only focus on the positives. We only talk about the things the movie does well, because no matter how critically panned a movie may be, no matter how poor its reception, a lot of people come together to make a movie. They work really hard. It's bound to be something to like. Right, Andrew?
Yep, there must be.
Always. This movie is written by Alan B. McElroy, which is a wonderful name. That's one of those, like, you told me that was a baseball player in the 60s, I would believe you.
Mm-hmm.
He has written several movies, including Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Now, Andrew, you're a big Halloween guy, right?
Yes.
You understand all the movies, the branching timelines.
Mm-hmm.
I have not seen them all. I know Halloween 3 famously doesn't have Michael Myers, so Halloween 4, as the title implies, is his big return. How's that movie?
It's an excellent candidate for the show. It's not. It was the big, because John Carpenter always kind of intended for Halloween to be an anthology series, and he kind of was coerced into Halloween 2, and then was like, "All right, we're done with Michael Myers. Now we're going to do something else." And was a big part of getting Halloween 3 made. And then when it bombed, the studio was like, "Well, back to Michael Myers." So
we got Halloween 4.
Made Halloween 4, which starts a loose trilogy with Halloween 5 and Halloween 6. And yes, I believe all of those are excellent candidates for this show.
Allen would later go on to write Ballistic, X versus Sever. Andrew, on our previous episode, I told you that I Still Know What You Did Last Summer is in my opinion, the worst movie title of all time. Ballistic, X versus Sever, best title of all time. I love the title of this movie. I'm going to tell you right now, I've never seen it. I know it doesn't have the best reputation, but ballistic is a cool word. X versus Sever. Who are these characters? Why are they fighting? I want to see this.
I saw that in theaters, so get on my level, folks.
And theaters, impressive. One of 20.
Yeah, and I think 7 of us were in the screening I went to.
Is the title the coolest part about that movie?
Yeah, it might be the only good thing about that movie. It's got a good cast, I guess.
He also notably wrote The Marine, starring everyone's favorite, John Cena.
And The Marine 4.
Oh, they didn't have him for 2 and 3, right? They just had to bring him back.
Clearly the quality was so bad they had to bring him back for 4.
Is that The Miz in Marine 4?
Probably.
He does like all the direct-to-DVD ones, right?
Yeah. The Miz is the dude now.
All right. Well, we're having fun with this guy's filmography, but I should say that he also co-created and was the showrunner for the Spawn animated series, which is actually pretty well received. I personally have not watched it, but from what I understand, it's a faithful adaptation and a little bit closer in tone to the source material.
It is. And Keith David, who is one of the great actors of our time, voices Spawn in that. It's very good at it. Yeah, if you're looking for something that kind of brings the aesthetic of the comics into animation, as well as kind of bringing in some of the more from the page storytelling, that show is definitely a much probably expanded look at that versus what they kind of have to do with 90 minutes here in the film.
The movie is directed by Mark A.Z. DePay, another wonderful baseball name. This was actually his directorial debut. Later, this is incredible. He directs Spawn in 1997, a movie that we said is not R-rated, but is very much in that category.
Yeah.
Later goes on to direct Halloween Town High and 3 animated Garfield movies. Sometimes I just love looking up and down at filmography and going, wow, that is all the same person. I'm not making fun. I'm glad the guy's working. He's doing a good job, but it's just the roller coaster ride, the ups and downs, the different tones you got to do to direct all those different things. It's incredible.
Well, then even some of his later stuff, like he does 2 Boxcar Children movies, which for those of you who aren't familiar, the Boxcar Children are like a young adult mystery series from like the 50s.
Like a Hardy Boys, but not quite.
Yeah, like a kind of, but it was about a bunch of kids that live in a boxcar. Real strange stuff. And then the one here that really confused me, Michael Jackson's Halloween in 2017.
Yeah, like which an animated thing.
Like an animated Michael Jackson Halloween special that has like a crazy stacked cast. I was like, what the? I didn't even know that existed. Like,
join us next week, folks, as we cover Michael Jackson's Halloween.
Unrelated to Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers.
Now, I found this interesting. This movie is partially produced by a company called Pull Down Your Pants Pictures, a company I had never heard of before. I watched this movie all the way through the end credits, just in case there was something there at the end. There was not, but there was the logo for this company. It's very crude. It's animated. It's just legs on the screen and their pants fall down and you see their underwear and it said, Pull Down Your Pants Pictures. And I'm like, what the heck is this? Turns out it is ILM employees or former ILM employees that were trying to launch this company to get away from ILM. I don't know what their grievances were exactly, but they seemed pretty eager to get away from the company. Now, ultimately, ILM themselves end up working on this movie. They bring in a lot more special effects crews than they initially planned, but in part, it's produced by Pull Down Your Pants Pictures.
Yes. The director, as well as I think some of the other people were all, I think it was 3, were all kind of Industrial Light and Magic employees. It was the director, Clint Goldman, and Steve Spaz Williams, whose name they used for the dog. They were basically all brought on board to this movie and saw it, like you said, as their ticket out of ILM. Like you said, I know there's a lot of horror stories about sometimes working in animation and digital effects work. I mean, notably, we know that fans are, or rather, that studios can be rather unforgiving in their expectations, sometimes in the compensation. I remember when Keanu Reeves made sure the Matrix visual effects team got a lot of compensation and credit for their work. That was kind of an anomaly, and he was very much something he was lauded for. But yeah, so it's possible they were looking to move something to something of their own making, something with some better conditions. I don't really know. Wasn't really able to find any further information on what exactly their grievances were, but they saw this as their ticket out.
Now, here's what I found really interesting, an interesting parallel to Spawn. You've got disgruntled employees wanting to move away from an established company to start their own. That's the story of Image Comics.
It is indeed.
So Image Comics is founded by a handful of artists that break away from, most notably, Marvel and DC to found their own publication so they can have creative control and actually own the characters that they create. For the most part, in comics up until that time, if you drew a brand new character or you created a character for a story, say in the X-Men franchise, Marvel owned that character, even if you designed it, wrote their origin, etc., etc. Creators were paid very little royalties on the characters they ultimately created. And when you think about how much marketing, how much licensing and toys go into comic books, it's easy to see how these guys got disgruntled. And it was Andrew, they're all artists, right? Who all was part of that initial?
It was 7 people. It was Todd McFarlane, who founded, his basically Spawn, Rob Liefeld, who led off with Youngblood, Eric Larson, who did Savage Dragon, Willis Portacio, who did Wetworks, but that was owned by Jim Lee's studio, where he did Wildcats. You also had Mark Silvestri, who did stuff like Witchblade, and then Jim Valentino, who did stuff like Shadowhawk. They were all looking to make their own mark, have more control. Some of them were known for writing. Larson specifically was a writer-artist before. But yeah, the goal was more control, more compensation, just creating a better environment where they could reap the benefits of the things they were creating.
The Image story, there's documentaries and books about it. We won't get on to all of it here. I will say these days, they have fulfilled that promise. There's a lot of creators that move to Image that have their own smaller stories, personal stories, create their own stories. Walking Dead comes from Image, one of the more notable ones. But in the 90s, in those early days, they were a little bit more known as, let me choose my knockoff characters, the other superheroes, a little bit style over substance. After all, it was founded by artists primarily and not quality writers. That's not to say it was bad. We've talked on the show before about how the 90s and comic books were a time of
excess.
Great way to put it. And Image was definitely a big part of that. It's where a character like Spawn comes from. He looks badass, first and foremost. Stories behind it, I mean, like any character, it's going to be hit or miss, but his popularity definitely comes from the visual.
Spawn is one of the few Image titles that is still in publication. It is one of the ones that has never ceased having an ongoing book. I think it passed 300 recently, which I think makes it the longest independent running book of all time. For a long time, it was Dave Sims' Cerebus, but that has been over for some time. And I think it came back, but it's now a different thing. But that and Savage Dragon, pretty much the only consistent books. But it really has fulfilled that promise. Kirkman, who writes The Walking Dead, later got added as a new Image partner, one of the first new partners since that original forming. So
even got like a imprint. Skybound.
Yeah, they all have their own. They all have their own imprints, basically. If you're a partner, so his is Skybound. But yeah, it's now a place where you can go to kind of foster that, and it's actually kind of forced some of the bigger companies to make some better offerings for creators to have their independent books be with them. But yeah, so yeah, we could go on about that for a long time. There's really a lot of documentaries out there about Image. They're worth watching. The story, like I said, the ultimate quality of the work aside, I think the formation of Image was a very important thing, and it's very interesting to hear about.
And it's interesting that it's only less than 10 years later, they're getting a movie made. They're getting Spawn in 1997. We've talked a lot about how in the 90s, it's very strange. The comic book adaptations that followed the success of Batman 89. For the most part, Hollywood went the pulp hero route. Things like Rocketeer, The Phantom, The Shadow. However, there was another string of adaptations that followed Batman 89, more inspired by that movie's tone and dark imagery. Movies like The Crow, Darkman, you could argue, is very much in that vein, and Spawn, like we have here. Let's jump into the movie, Andrew.
Yep.
Al Simmons is a former Marine, now special ops soldier working on top secret missions. When he is double crossed and killed by his employer, he makes a deal with the devil and returns to Earth as Spawn, a supernatural being meant to lead the devil's army in the apocalypse. Al arrives back on Earth 5 years after his death and learns that his wife is now married to his best friend and former partner. Meanwhile, a demonic clown named Violator encourages Spawn to use his powers for evil, while Cagliostro, an older man with similar powers, tries to tell Spawn that he still has a choice and can fight for good. First things first, Andrew, we're going to talk about the cast of this movie. And as always, we're going to start at the top, at the best casting, the best performance. We want to find one performance that goes above and beyond the Call of Duty and raises the quality of the entire movie. We recognize that performance by giving the actor or actress the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, who gets your Mark Strong Award for Spawn?
I thought it was going to be Martin Sheen as Jason Wynn, but it is not. I think genuinely looking at people that are dedicating themselves to the role, dedicating themselves to really kind of whatever's being asked of them, I think, to me, it's without question the Mark Strong of this movie is John Leguizamo as clown/violator.
Oh, 100%. 100%. He gets the Mark Strong Award from me as well. I mean, so much to say about this. I'll let you kickstart it, though.
But I mean, he's in this, had to be ungodly, uncomfortable, and hot, full body suit the entire movie. You can't even tell it's him, really. It's only in his voice.
He's got a fat suit. He's got elaborate costumes. He's got makeup. He's got a wig. He has contacts. He even has
teeth,
fake teeth. I think you don't see a square inch of John Leguizamo in the entire movie. Like his tongue is the only thing that's actually him. It's absurd.
It's absurd. But it's the voice. Really, you hear the voice, and even despite all those limitations, he's still doing a bunch of like pratfalls and physical comedy stuff. He's way in this. He is dedicated to the wacky insanity that is being clown/violator. But
now, explain that to me, because that's always credited to clown / are these two separate characters? Is clown the clown and violator the monster? What is this?
No, it's all Violator. He's just a guy named Violator. He just has the clown form. Like obviously he's the one trying to pull Spawn towards doing hell's dirty work, essentially. So he's the guy that's kind of there when Spawn gets brought back. He's the guy that's trying to bring him into the fold in hell to lead the armies of Malabolgia. And this look, the way they have him look, that's like right off the page. It's how the character looks.
I haven't read a lot of Spawn, but I definitely looked up some images. And yeah, it's like 1 for 1. It's pretty incredible.
It's 1 for 1. It's pretty good.
The casting director looked at this character and thought John Leguizamo, or John sought out this character. I couldn't find much about the casting of this, but how that happened, I have no idea. But the results are fantastic. I read they didn't even have a cooling system for his suit. He was just sweating buckets in that thing, but it was so gross by the end of production. But to be in that miserable of a situation and still give this performance through all the prosthetics, through all the makeup, it's incredible. I love John Leguizamo. I mean, even things like Super Mario Bros., right? Not a great movie. Love what he's doing there. He's in movies like Carlito's Way. I really like him in Tu Wong Fu. He's beautiful in Tu Wong Fu. I will say that. The best looking of the main cast. He's doing.
Dare you disrespect Patrick Swayze in this house?
I love the Sways, but
yeah.
Come on.
John Leguizamo's great. I even like him in like his bit stuff, like when he's in Chef or John Wick. If he's in a movie, he's typically putting himself in pretty hard. He's not usually phoning it in. like I said, even stuff like Mario Brothers. He's got my favorite gag in that whole movie. So
what's okay? Well, I gotta ask what it is now. What's your favorite
it's the
gag in
whole.
Mario
It's the whole. It's explaining their names.
Mario and Luigi Mario?
Yes. For some reason,
so
that scene never
ridiculous.
fails to make me laugh immensely.
Um, Even I'm gonna give him credit for this. He does Sid the Sloth in the Ice Age series, and Sid the Sloth does not just sound like John Leguizamo talking. A lot of times when you cast a big name as a animated character, you just want their voice. You just want it to sound like Brad Pitt or sound like Nick Cage or whoever's doing the voice. But he puts on a character and acts when he doesn't have to. Dennis Leary's in the same movie, and he's just being Dennis Leary. That tiger just sounds like Dennis Leary or the elephant Ray Romano, but he does. It's not immediately obvious that it's John Leguizamo. He's actually putting in effort and a character to that. And seriously, a lot of respect for that. What he's doing here, I think I was able to sum it up. It is R-rated Genie. He's doing Genie from Aladdin, but crude and kind of gross. He will go off on tangents and change his costume and have references that kids aren't going to get. I think he imitates like Jimmy Stewart at one point.
Yeah.
And references to tons of like old TV and stuff. I mean, it's Genie.
He's very gross in this movie too. There's genuinely some scenes with him where I like almost dry heaved like in real time because there's just some nasty stuff.
Someone in the special effects department had to animate a fart when he farts. A green, very dramatic cloud comes out.
No,
and if that's not enough, he rips out his underwear and shows off his skid marks.
There's a scene where he eats a pizza with maggots on it. And I was legit just like, it's like not just as he picked the pizza up, you see him full on take like a bite of the whole thing. And even just talking about it now, I want to like
live maggots at the pizza that he pulls out.
I don't know I don't know how they did it. I need to stop talking about this.
It's pretty fun. But it's legitimately, you gotta laugh at me though, because he picks up the pizza and goes,
"Oh God!"
He picks up the picks and goes, "Oh yuck, anchovies!" And he picks off the anchovy.
And leaves the maggots.
That worked for me. I will, not every joke he throws out there lands. I don't think for anybody, but the ones that do, I think are genuinely funny. And at the very least, you got to respect what he's doing here.
Because he's kind of on 100% of the time. Anytime Clown is on screen, he's doing something. It is akin to Genie in that regard, where you're getting like when Genie is on screen in Aladdin, it's unhinged Robin Williams, basically. Like that's the same kind of bit here, where like there's just anytime Clown is on screen, he's going completely over the top.
There's a gag towards the end of the movie where he blows up a balloon in his hand. As the balloon inflates with his face on it, his head like shrinks, and then the balloon pops and his head comes back, and he goes, "It does wonders for my asthma." Like that is absolutely something Genie would do.
Right. So yeah, he's in 100%. I don't think there's any question he's the Mark Strong of this.
Michael Jai White plays Al Simmons / Spawn, the lead of this movie. Now, I love this man, known for his martial arts and a lot of bit parts because of that skill. Later would play Gamble in The Dark Knight, which is a pretty significant gangster role in that movie. He's the first man that Heath Ledger's Joker tells his story of how he got his scars to and is mysteriously killed in that scene. Researching for this movie, I found the whole interview about that specific scene with Michael Jai White, who says that he wasn't supposed to die in that scene, and that's why the editing is kind of strange. And the internet debates about how he was killed, and he didn't know that until the premiere of the movie, that it was edited in a way that he dies in that scene. Supposedly, he was supposed to get a scar in his cheek, similar to Joker, and have some scenes later, but no official word about what his character was supposed to do after that. He also plays Jax Briggs in Mortal Kombat Rebirth and Legacy. That is the project that started as a fan movie and turned into a legitimate licensed web series that's pretty popular.
Oh yeah, he's like I said, here lately he's kind of been all over the place. I remember him actually from Universal Soldier: The Return. He plays the villain of that piece. I also remember Goldberg was in that movie.
I watched that a lot growing up. Yeah.
It was one of those movies that was always on TV, was always happening. And, Jean-Claude Van Damme versus Michael Jai White. It's a fight I'll watch. I ain't going to turn that off. But he had a turn more recently on the CW universes playing Bronze Tiger. Did that over about 6 years. So he's been all over the place, but he's front and center at this movie.
Yeah, you got to imagine his athletic background is a big part of why he was cast in this movie. It's only really the opening act that we see him as Al Simmons, as a normal human, because after that, he is sent to hell, makes the deal with the devil, comes back, and his body is scarred head to toe after that, or he's covered in the Spawn suit. So just like John Leguizamo is constantly acting through makeup and prosthetics. It's a pretty gnarly makeup too. I mean, like he doesn't have ears. He just got, because I mean, he's burned head to toe. So there's a lot of stuff on his face. It's not just something they slapped on. I'm sure it took hours every single day. Then he had to go out there and do his physical performance. So it's a big ask. Even have some emotional key scenes like being reunited with his wife and daughter through makeup.
I think they said it was 2 to 4 hours for Simmons makeup stuff. And it was, yeah, I mean, that's a long time to sit around and do that. I mean, but he's, yeah. And so not just are you having to be the star of this film, you're having to act through a bunch of prosthetics and still try to convey emotion and story and all of that. And it's a tough sell for anybody, but Jai White seemed more than up to the task.
There's a few times my favorite parts of his performance and whenever he's allowed to have a little bit of fun, because it's obviously a very tragic character and given everything that happens to him, but there's times when he's first using his powers, we get a good he gets shot up and then the bullet holes heals and he goes, damn. And then later in the same scene, he's falling seemingly to his death, and then the chains come out and grab onto the building and he goes, hell yeah. It's like, yeah, that's the kind of reaction I would have if I suddenly had these cool powers. And that levity, there's a few moments like levity that are my favorite parts of his performance.
Yeah, I think so. It's those moments where like you kind of get a break from the bleakness of his kind of story, which is a pretty tragic story. I mean, it's Al Simmons is a guy who within the frame of this movie is trying to get out of this not quite mercenary game, but he's definitely starting to have some seeming lingering negative feelings towards the work he does. And before he can, he's betrayed by his employer, his boss, whatever you want to call him, sent to hell as part of a greater plot. Like it turns out his boss is all mixed up in this too, but gets brought back, doesn't realize it's 5 full years later, and has this just realization that the world has moved on without him, including his wife, who's now with his former friend. Like it's a lot of messed up stuff for one guy to go through. Those moments of levity kind of help you take away from the bleakness of it. A little bit of, he is, there's some fun to be had here regardless.
Speaking of his boss, that character's name, Jason Wynn, played by Martin Sheen. On paper, you're trying to pick out a Mark Strong award. You're probably thinking, like you said, it's going to be Martin Sheen. It's Martin freaking Sheen in Spawn. This is like Tommy Lee Jones is in Captain America. What? This is that kind of casting. You bring in someone legit, someone with a history to play, a significant role, but not the lead of the movie. What do you think about what Martin Sheen is doing in this movie, Andrew?
I don't. It's an odd kind of role because he's the villain, but he's kind of not. So
not the ultimate villain.
Not the ultimate villain.
Being played by, manipulated by the ultimate villain.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a strange role just because I don't think he gets a whole lot to do, really. He's obviously Martin Sheen, notably known for Apocalypse Now, which this movie makes several references to. Like,
now I
was kind of like,
I did not. That is the first movie that comes to mind. I think of Martin Sheen, but I did not catch these references. So, what are the references to Apocalypse?
So the big one that happens is like it's towards the end. It's where they're at the house and like they're getting sucked through the fireplace, which acts as a tunnel to hell, apparently. Yeah. And at one point, Violator is talking to Wynn, and he says, "We need to get this going so we can kickstart the apocalypse now." Then there's another line where one of the guys says, "I love the I think it's Violator again that says, "I love the smell of asphalt in the morning," which is obviously a reference.
I didn't even think about that. Okay.
So there's a lot to the point that like by the end of it, I was like, I get it. Martin Sheen was in Apocalypse Now, guys. We get it.
My favorite Apocalypse Now reference is in Hot Shots, the sequel, actually, Hot Shots Part Duh, where Martin Sheen's son is playing the lead, Charlie Sheen, and he's going down the river on a boat, and he's got his inner monologue, and he passes by another boat with Martin Sheen on
Martin
it.
Sheen in it.
As they pass each other, they say, "I loved you in Wall Street."
That is a great joke. I love that gag. It is so good. Plays right into my need for like needlessly specific references and jokes where it's like
Apocalypse Now and it's Wall Street.
And it's Wall Street.
And you've got to know that they're like father and son. It's a lot of layers to it.
It's
oh God.
Obviously Sheen. Yeah, go ahead.
We've talked about Hot Shots a lot in the show.
We'll have to get there one day.
So we'll find
this is actually before Sheen is on The West Wing, which comes after this, which I think
kind of like his. I don't know if redemption is the right word, but
his
like
resurgence, the Sheenaissance, if you will.
Martin Sheen, his filmography is insane. The dude like never stops working. He also seems to not be. I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this. He's not too picky about his roles. I mean, he just wants to keep working. Some of the stuff he's in is high profile. Some of it is almost like made for TV level. And that's not a knock against the guy. I mean, acting is a job and he's just doing his job. But yeah, he didn't exactly have high star power, I guess, in 97.
No, and that's, I think, because I thought The West Wing was on by this point, and that was kind of where I was coming from, where I was like, man, you're on The West Wing and you're doing Spawn? Good for you. Like, just that's a choice, man. And respect to making it. But no, that actually starts 2 years later. And like I said, I don't really think it's like a redemption, but I think it's coming after many years of like just doing almost anything, that I think like when he does The West Wing and everyone's like, oh, like there you are, like, welcome back, like that sort of thing, like where he finally kind of resurged and like reestablishes himself. So this is like right before that. And I mean, he's not bad in this movie.
He's like the ultimate bad guy, like no redemption, no good, and like he's got the bad guy voice the entire time. He's got this great villain laugh. If you've ever heard this story before, take a walk with me, Andrew.
All right.
Van Halen, when they're recording the song "Jamie's Crying," so David Lee Roth stops smoking and drinking for the days leading up for that song. It's kind of a ballad. The music's not too heavy. It's big emphasis on his vocals. And whenever he goes in to lay the tracks down, the producer hates it. And he's like, this is not what people want to listen to. And he made him go outside, chain smoke cigarettes, drink soda, come back in, and then record his lines again. And how much of that is like urban legend, I don't know. There's probably some truth to it and probably exaggerated. But that reminds me of what Martin Sheen is doing here. I feel like the director made him chain smoke cigarettes, have a pack every morning before he started, because he's always got that gravelly bad guy voice the entire movie.
And then he smokes like in his scene. So like he's like, not just smoke before this, smoke while you're doing it too. No, he's even got a goatee, and you know guys with goatees are evil, man.
It's true.
But he's the ultimate bad guy, no redemption. He's part of this plot by hell to wage war with heaven. Like he's part of basically helping send the world into chaos. That's part of what his group with Al Simmons is doing. And then ultimately, hell are the ones that tell him to betray Simmons and essentially kill him.
Because they want Simmons in hell to lead their army.
Because Simmons is that good at his job, I guess. He's like I said, there's just not quite as much to sink his teeth into as somebody like Violator. But he's like you said, unredemptive bad guy with the bad guy voice, the bad guy look.
Now, his right-hand man, or woman, I should say, is Jessica Priest, played by Melinda Clarke. This is one of my favorite performances in the movie. Probably my runner-up for the Mark Strong, if I had to pick one. Because she, just like we've been saying, she is in. She is the only one besides Spawn and Violator that looks like a comic book character. She's inexplicably always dressed up like a villain. This black leather looks like a bad guy from the comics. I don't know much about her comic book counterpart. I assume what she's wearing is close to what she wears in the comics, but
Yeah.
she gets some interesting little character moments when we first see her. I actually had to look away because she's like she has this giant spider crawling on her and she's playing with it. I do not, I can't mess with spiders. I literally look away from the screen, but it informs you a lot about the character. That black leather, that spider, like, all right, I get it. She's bad. She does Jason Wynn's dirty work in helping kill Al Simmons, and it's really just his muscle. She would later play Marissa's mom, Julie Cooper, on The OC.
Yes.
So when I saw that in her filmography, I had to ask my wife about it because she's actually literally watching The OC, rewatching The OC right now.
Sure.
And so I know she's in deep. I'm like, she plays Julie Cooper. Is that a major character? She's like, oh yeah, it's Marissa's mom. And she's like, Melinda Clark also was Amazon on Xena, and I have her autograph on a card. So in my house right now is Melinda Clark's autograph on a Xena trading card. Thanks to friend of the show, my wife.
Nice. Can't say I saw that one coming.
What do you think about her in this movie, though?
She's another one that just kind of seems to get it. Like she's like, it's ridiculous over top. The black leather, all that is from the comics. In the comics, obviously, it's even more over the top, obviously, because got to tone it down a little bit. But she's she's into this. This is actually a departure from the comics in that Jessica Priest is not the one who kills Al Simmons in the comics. It's a character named Chapel, who is actually part of Rob Liefeld's Youngblood. So because of that, they couldn't actually use the character of Chapel in this film. So they kind of swapped in Jessica Priest instead. And I think my Spawn history gets shady and spotty. I think they eventually retcon it so that Priest is responsible, just because now Rob Liefeld has taken his stuff and gone elsewhere. So they want to be able to reference that without having to worry about rights and stuff. But yeah, but she's in. She's way into this. Again, not a whole lot of screen time.
No.
But yeah, she's pretty good in her role here.
A few smaller parts to clean up the cast here. You got Teresa Randall playing Wanda Blake. That is Al Simmons' wife, who remarries to his partner. She doesn't have a lot to do. She is simply the love interest who was with him. Now she's with him. She's classic damsel in distress at the end. So unfortunately, just not a lot to sink her teeth into. As far as her filmography, she's had some notable roles, but what stood out to me, she plays Juanita Jordan in Space Jam. Michael Jordan's wife, which I had to think about. I was like, so wait, that wasn't his actual wife in the movie? Did they make up a family? But no, his wife at the time was Juanita Jordan. So she's playing an actual person. She's playing his wife.
And I think they're doing the same thing for the new Space Jam, where like LeBron's family are played by people that aren't LeBron's family.
I'm sure they would be pretty good at that role. It's like their life. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, a little strange. But yeah, she's, again, not a big part, not a lot to do here. She's very important to Al. But generally, she's mostly reacting to things, not a whole lot of direct action here.
His partner that she remarries to, his name is Terry Fitzgerald, played by D.B. Sweeney. Hashtag positivity podcast. I think he's probably the weakest part of the cast. I don't want to dig into it too much. However, he is in another movie I'm familiar with. He's in The Cutting Edge from 1992, which is a rom-com where he is a skater, a hockey player that gets injured and gets into the world of figure skating and gets partnered up with a female partner, and they quibble at first, then fall in love. And it's
of course,
cheesy,
typical story. Typical story.
Something I saw a lot on TV growing up, but in this movie, I mean, I don't know. He's the guy with the goatee.
Yeah, he's kind of in a strange place where he's supposed to be like, he works with Al at this Black Ops organization. I can't even remember what they're called now. Something 6.
A6, I think.
A6 something. But as the movie kind of goes on, he kind of like is meant to have this sort of internal struggle where like he sees what's happening and is starting to have disagreements with it. And so he's trying to like rival against Wynn, but Wynn basically just tells him, I know your entire family is, I'll just kill them all. And it's like, the tension just isn't really there. Like it feels like like we've already got the Simmons Wynn feud going, and then Wynn also feuding with Clown to an extent. So to add yet another person kind of feuding with Wynn just kind of feels, it just doesn't get a lot of attention. So it just doesn't quite land like I think it should. So yeah, positivity podcast, but I don't disagree that I think he's probably the weakest part. And I think that just comes down to the script having too much else going on.
Now, Cogliostro, played by Nicole Williamson, not given a lot to do, sort of a mysterious mentor figure in this movie.
Yeah.
Not a name I recognize, but I looked at his filmography. Dude's been around forever, very highly respected, highly regarded, lots of classics, lots of Shakespeare under his belt. He was in a famous adaptation of Mice and Men. He played Lenny, so respectable actor, kind of like Mark Sheen, just kind of taking roles at this point, I think, in his career. Just
this is actually his final role. His final film.
I saw that he passed away in 2011. R.I.P.
So apparently he just didn't really do much. He notably has a bit part in The Exorcist 3, a movie that I think deserves a better reputation than it has. And also, I remember him as Merlin from Excalibur, which was a John Boorman directed Arthurian legend film. That's one of the better adaptations, I think. Great visual style, and I just like that movie a lot. But Cogliostro himself, I mean, obviously, when you're dealing with 300 issues of comics, his role has shifted and changed over the years. But this is one of the characters that Neil Gaiman introduced in his issue of Spawn that he wrote, and was one of the 3 characters that got embroiled in the legal battle between Neil Gaiman and Todd McFarlane that spread many decades, cost millions of dollars and millions of lives, and was thankfully settled later. But the 3 characters in question were Cogliostro, Medieval Spawn, and Angela, who he all introduced. Angela eventually moves to Marvel, but Cogliostro is still used. But yeah,
now,
basically he starts off.
Cogliostro Medieval Spawn, because he's definitely like from that era. So the story they present in this movie is that, like Spawn, he was chosen to be a Hellspawn, be part of Hell's army, but he decided to use the powers granted to him for good instead of for the devil. In this movie, he's trying to tell our Spawn, Al Simmons, that he has a choice and he can still fight for good. But it's implied that he's been around for possibly centuries. He has chainmail. That's why I asked if he's actually a medieval Spawn, because something that I thought was pretty funny in the climax of this movie, whenever he joins Spawn to go to hell and fight, before he dives into that fireplace and goes back down to hell, he pulls his chainmail up over his head.
Yeah, just so you can know.
Yeah, that's the protection he needs.
I don't believe in the comics they're the same person. I don't think. I can't swear to that. But obviously, I think the movie is definitely drawing a line there. Now, Cogliostro is a former Hellspawn, even in the comics. So he's got that. The history they're presenting here is very similar. I just don't think he's also Medieval Spawn. I don't remember. Please don't roast us, viewers. I don't remember. But either way, this is one of those characters that are kind of embroiled in that legal battle. But obviously, he is instrumental in Spawn's early days, filling this same kind of role where he's kind of the mentor that's like trying to guide him, because he does seem to know more about Spawn's situation than Spawn does. And in the movie and in the comics, that's kind of his job, is to give him the training montage, so that he can understand what it is and kind of what he's got going on with his powers and how he can do that and assist him with that. And really acts as the foil to Violator / Clown. Basically, you've got Violator Clown on one side pulling him to hell, while you've got Cogliostro on the other side trying to be like, no, you don't have to do what they want you to do. You can actually fight back against them. So that those are meant to be the 2 pieces or the 2 sides of the fight, and they're both trying to pull Simmons in their own way.
There are a ton of parallels between this movie and Ghost Rider. Both feature a character who makes a deal with the devil, who ultimately decides to use the powers granted to him by the devil for good instead of bad. They both have a mentor with the same powers that is trying to assist them and show them the way lots of parallels beyond that. Not to the point where I think Spawn is any kind of ripoff of Ghost Rider, but there's only so many ways you can go with it when you're talking about a hero who makes a deal with the devil.
Yep.
Speaking of the devil, what do they call him in this movie?
Malabolgia.
Malabolgia. That is the last bit of casting I want to talk about. Did you see who voices Malabolgia?
Frank Welker.
Frank Welker. If you're unfamiliar with Frank Welker, I have his filmography pulled up, and I'm going to go through a bit of it.
We don't have 10 years.
He has over 860 credits to his name. Most famously voices Freddy on Scooby-Doo since the 60s. He's the only man who has done it. The OG. Even these days, I saw that he's actually doing Scooby-Doo as well.
After Don Messick passed away. Yeah.
What I find super interesting is not only does he do voice work, but he does, I don't know, sound effect work. Listen to some of these credits. He plays Cujo in Cujo. In Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, he is credited with Spock's screams. In Gremlins, he plays Stripe, Mogwai, and various other gremlins. In the Transformers movie, the 86th animated movie, he voiced Megatron, Rumble, Wheelie, Frenzy, Junkion, Soundwave, and Ravage. In the English dub for My Neighbor Totoro, he voices both Totoro and Catbus, which are not speaking roles in case you haven't seen that. In Tremors, he voices the Graboids. I don't even know what that means.
He is. I don't think it's hyperbole to say there will never be another voice actor like Frank Welker.
No. Biggest part of my childhood as far as his work, he voices Toka and Razor in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2.
Yep.
Because for some reason they didn't want to use Bebop and Rocksteady.
Yeah, they would not use them in a live action film until 20 plus years later.
Also, an odd part of my childhood here, in Little Giants, he voices X and O dots. I can't even pick. Is there like
it's during the credits? It's during the intro credits. I'm not even kidding. Like the X's and O's are running around making noises. That's ridiculous. That is
he's Bigfoot in a Goofy movie. In the 1995 Mortal Kombat, he's Shao Kahn and Reptile and Goro. He's the Pegasus in Hercules, Save Me or Spawn.
The Pegasus. Again, the Pegasus does not speak.
But yeah, incredible, prolific career. Just it's
absolutely
fun.
Incredible.
His filmography has its own Wikipedia. That's what I'm looking at right now. I encourage everybody to just scroll through this thing and just be in awe of what this man can do with his voice. But here we have him as say it one more time for me, Andrew.
Malabolgia.
Why can't these movies ever just call him Devil? In Ghost Rider, he's Mephistopheles. He's Mephistopheles. Mephistopheles. I don't know how to say. I'm joking around, but now I can't remember how to say it. Mephistopheles.
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 Yes.
The devil. He's the devil.
Mephistopheles is from Cats.
Okay, thanks.
No, yeah, this is another one that, to be fair, is taken from the comics. Malabolgia is like, I guess by making it a separate character, you can copyright it, you can franchise it, you can claim to it. I guess I don't really know.
You can make Malabolgia lunchboxes
because that's what Todd McFarlane does.
That is true.
It is. The other bit of casting I just thought was interesting too is Miko Hughes plays Zach, the kid. And I just remember he was in Kindergarten Cop. He was in Wes Craven's New Nightmare. He was in Apollo 13. He was like this child actor in the 90s who just happened to like pop up in all the movies I remember watching as a kid and even as an adult. It's just, and yeah, I just remember he was also notably in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which was his weird meta Nightmare on Elm Street movie where it's in the real world, but Freddy's like trying to break into the real world. This is before Scream too, so it's this weird meta movie before Scream, but he's in that too. It's very strange, but yeah, that was it on the casting.
All right, well, let's jump into the movie. Let's talk about some of these scenes, specifically the best scenes, because that's what we do on the show. We're talking about the high points of the movie and what it does well. As always, we're going to start at the top. Andrew, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What do you think is the best scene of the movie?
I think it is the face-off that Spawn has with Wynn for the first time, where he fights Priest. That whole sequence where he's kind of learning about some of his powers. He's trying to get his revenge on Wynn for the first time. But it's kind of the big public unveiling of Spawn, for lack of a better way to put it. And I think,
Yeah.
for me, this is when the movie is kind of all the boxes are getting ticked. Spawn doesn't really have a great grasp on his powers yet. Like I said, he gets shot here and he like heals up and he's kind of shocked. But he's still using guns, which he eventually realizes he doesn't need once he gets attacked with his powers. But yeah, just that kind of the big reveal scene. I think it works pretty well in just showing us Spawn, giving us Spawn kind of doing his thing, fighting off people, getting in his fight with Priest and kind of get revenge on her for killing him in the first place. And then just, putting the fear of Malabolgia into Jason Wynn.
That first shot where he breaks, because it's like at a ball, basically, like a fancy place. And he breaks in through the domed glass ceiling and he floats down because he has this insanely large cape. I remember that shot from the trailer. That shot is like burned into my memory of him coming down, and it looks pretty rad. I'm sure we can talk a lot about the special effects in this movie. The cape looks 1997. I don't mean that as an insult. What I'm saying is you can tell like it's not a real 200-foot cape, but it still looks rad. Its use of it here is very cool as he comes down. Lots of fun stuff. Like I said, he's learning his powers. He gets shot up. They heal. He has that fun moment. He fights Jessica Priest during the scene, who's all decked out in her supervillain attire. They have a very interesting moment where she goes to kick him in the crotch. And like you said, he doesn't have a firm grasp on his powers yet. We learn later that it's reactive right now. Like it's anticipating the situation and adapting situation. So she goes to kick him in the crotch and his belt buckle reaches out like the tongue of a xenomorph and grabs her shin and stops her before she can make contact with his crotch. And it's ridiculous. I love it.
It speaks to the kind of, I say this lovingly, the kind of, that's definitely something I could have seen in one of McFarlane's comics. Just the way that's kind of his writing.
I don't think it's an insult to say that the humor and tone of this movie is juvenile. I mean, I think it's made for 15-year-old boys. I think that's legitimately the target demographic. I think that's why this movie is not rated R, because they knew who their audience was. They knew who they were playing to. And that's not to say like if you're, you can be an adult and know this movie. Don't get me wrong, but very much, we talk about these emails that we got from people saying, "Oh man, I want you to cover Spawn." We'll get into their emails later, but I think these are from people that watch this movie growing up and are gonna have a soft spot for it and a fondness. And again, nothing wrong with that, because that's who this movie is made for, with gags like that and just its overall tone and attitude.
I agree. I think it's definitely playing to, I think, kind of the people they assumed were reading Spawn at the time. This is 97. So Spawn's been around for 5 years at that point. And I think really they're just going for the fans, which to me, I think fit into that more juvenile age frame than adults. And I think that's part of why they wanted to keep it PG-13.
Yeah, I mean, in 1997, adults, they're going to see Batman and Robin. Adults got their movie.
Yeah, exactly. So, just make one for the kids.
I like at the end of the scene, he breaks out of the building where this party is being had, and he's got the cops on his tail. Pretty cool stuff here, because he's like scaling the side of the building. They've got like a searchlight trying to find him, and his cape again is adapting, and it covers him up and then camouflages him. His cape transforms to look like the bricks of the wall, so they can't see him. And then when the spotlight's off, it goes back to being a regular cape. But because he's new to this and inexperienced, he trips and knocks a piece of the brick down so that the cops realize he's there and they eventually find him. And I like that. I like seeing like an inexperienced hero trying to learn their powers.
Right.
It's a nice touch. It's not like he's Spawn. All of a sudden he's infallible and automatically knows how to use all these powers. I mean, this is an origin movie at the end of the day. So I like going through the paces with them.
Yeah. So it makes it feel a little like, again, we're taking a break from the kind of dire bleak nature of this story to kind of again lighten the tone a little bit. And
Yeah.
it's all good stuff.
I'll say one of my biggest pet peeves in superhero movies, comic book movies, any kind of supernatural movie, I guess, is whenever powers are undefined, whenever I don't know what all the hero or villain is capable of, it kind of drives me nuts because you can get really lazy with the writing and then just magically come up with some new power at the most convenient times. And for a while in this movie, it's kind of given me those vibes because he's got chains that come out conveniently, and then other times he can like escape transforms. And I'm just having a hard time, grasping what all he can do. But so does the main character. It's not until Cagliostro breaks it down for him, and Violator as well, explaining what the suit can do. They even explain it maybe a little bit too much at times, as Cagliostro tells him that there's trillions of neural connections in his suit. And Spawn, he gets it right away. He's a smart guy. He says, so that's how it works. But Cagliostro is telling him that the suit will react to things, but if he can focus, he can manifest and create the powers on his own. It's very similar to like Green Lantern almost, where whatever he imagines, the suit can accomplish. And after we get that explanation,
what was it Green Lantern used to do that?
Oh, I believe it was the emerald energy of willpower.
There it is.
Yeah. Emerald energy of will. How could I forget?
How? I can't imagine how.
One man's emerald energy of willpower is another man's trillions of neural connections. I love comic books.
Beautiful.
All right. So that, anyway, I agree, Andrew. That's a great scene. I love it. Lots of fun little bits. It is not the scene that I wrote down as my favorite scene or what I considered the best scene in the movie. What I wrote down was the motorcycle chase that comes before the climax of this movie. Spawn is rushing to his wife's house because she is going to be under attack by Violator. As Spawn is riding his motorcycle to her, Violator tries to run him off the road with I guess it's a gas truck. And we get a really cool sequence on the highway. There's a lot of practical effects here, which the movie skips out on at times, but I appreciate when they put in the money and effort to have a good practical scene. For about half this time, Violator is driving the truck, and then inexplicably about halfway through, he's just sitting on the back of the truck. I don't know who's driving at that time, but I'm not asking these kind of questions, while I'm watching the scene because it's pretty rad. I like it for a lot of reasons. For one, you've got an actual person on a motorcycle. Speaking of Spawn's suit real quick, we haven't talked about it too much yet, but his eyes, they're like green lights, and it's real. It's practical. I think they're touching it up a little bit in post, but like on set, there's someone in a suit with green glowing eyes. I've always wanted to see in live action, like Batman's white eyes, we can normally see in the comics. In BVS, we kind of get it with the armor, but even like his normal suit, he's got these cool white eyes in the comics. It's hard to translate in the live action. They could have done something similar here with Spawn, but they chose to actually give him the green lights. And I think it looks pretty cool, especially as he's riding this motorcycle. Those green lights really stand out. It's a fun chase. Eventually, Violator lets out necro goo, as he calls it, out of the back of this gas truck that covers the road in slippery green necro goo. To win this fight, Spawn wraps his motorcycle in his cape, and then it sort of hardens to this rad looking motorcycle form that still at the top of it has green eyes at the top of that form. In the end, he takes him down in a pretty cool way. He uses his cape once again to make this giant spike in the road that Violator's truck runs into and explodes. And we get a fun shot from the air of Violator flying out of the explosion. And he says, "I'll see you at Wanda's," and he flies off screen. Just a really fun scene. It's got the cool special effects.
Yeah.
The cool cape stuff that I really like, and plenty of practical mixed in. It uses both of them effectively. I worry sometimes because we talk about CG a lot on the show, and sometimes it's not in the best light. I don't think like all CG is bad. Practical is always better. There's a time and place for both. And I think this scene in particular chooses its battles wisely for when to
Sure.
use one versus the other.
Yeah, it's a great scene. And I'm always a fan of like practical. They even with Violator, when he goes into his normal form, there's some attempts to use a practical version of that in certain sequences with it to try to make it feel not as CG focused. That is one of this film's biggest criticisms is the CG. That's one of the things that you kind of hear in every review is that the CG is kind of rough at times.
Sure.
But the cape stuff,
even for 97.
yeah. But the cape stuff is cool because, like I said, you're not going to be able to do an actual 200-foot cape that engulfs the whole building. But this scene is definitely one, like I said, where they find that balance. They can see the right way to use the practical to their advantage and then use the CG when necessary.
Like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, we've heard a lot from listeners of the show about this movie. They've sent in their thoughts about it and simply just requested that we cover the show. Here is a few examples of that. First off, we got Paul from Texas who sent us this email. I'll read it verbatim. I would like to formally request a Spawn episode because this movie fucks. Definitely one of my favorite superhero movies of the 90s. And he simply adds John Leguizamo.
Well,
short and to the point.
Short and to the point.
And I agree. Andrew, John Leguizamo.
John Leguizamo, indeed. Because when in doubt, guys, when you think that things are looking rough and you're not sure if there's a light at the end of the tunnel and you wonder if you're not good enough or maybe things aren't going your way, you can always take solace in John Leguizamo.
John Leguizamo. Stitching on a pillow. We got this email from Jake from Michigan, who says, please do an episode on the Spawn movie. The costume design is so good. I also really dug the Spawnified motorcycle, like he was Ghost Rider. A Spawn/Ghost Rider crossover comic would be so absurd and fun as hell. Fun choice of words there, Jake. It would be fun as hell. We already talked about a little bit how there's a lot of parallels between the two characters. I agree. I'm guessing that's never happened because Spawn is in Image and Ghost Rider's over there in Marvel, but if the planets ever aligned, that would be a fun story to read.
I think there's been Spawn crossovers before, so yeah, it's not out of the question.
But he's right though. The costume looks like Spawn. I mean, we talked about how Violator or Clown looks like Clown from the comics. Spawn, whenever he has his mask on and everything, looks like Spawn. It has like a texture to the suit, which I appreciate. They took into account that this is a live action film and just maybe a plain black or spandex look wouldn't translate too well, but they give it a cool texture that I really appreciated.
Yeah, they try to like not just put a dude in a black spandex suit. It's practical too. The bulk of the Spawn suit is all practical. There's obviously some CG transitions with like him putting the mask on and stuff like that. But yeah, it's I think a pretty faithful attempt at bringing that look to the screen. And like I said, 98% practical.
We also got this email from Doug from Texas. Now, full disclosure, you and we know Doug.
We do.
He, I think we've mentioned him on the podcast before. He used to work at a movie theater, and he's the reason that I saw many of the movies that we talk about for free. So, hey, thanks, Doug. He is one that has been asking us to cover Spawn since we launched this podcast. So, Doug, I hope you're happy listening to this, and thank you for sending in your thoughts. Here's what Doug had to say. First off, excellent makeup effects. And he adds, people online always make fun of Malibolgia's mouth barely moving when he speaks. I always thought he was communicating telepathically. I would think his actual voice would make your head explode like gods in Dogma. John Leguizamo deserves the Mark Strong Award. Doug, we agree. He is all in and finds a great balance of funny enough to entertain while still vulgar and annoying enough to be a villain. He also ate live maggots on pizza. In a movie full of CGI, this dude ate live maggots. He adds clowns. Andrew is dry heaving as I say this. Clown's cheerleader routine alone is worth the price of admission. Martin Sheen is having a blast. You can tell he loves playing an over-the-top villain. There's a woman wearing a gender-swapped Green Ranger costume at Martin Sheen's ball. Totally random, but super rad. I did not notice that, Doug, but I'm going to
I
go
didn't
back
either.
and
I'm
watch
gonna have to
that
go
scene
back.
now.
Yeah.
He continues. I'm not sure if the movie intended this or not, but I laughed when Priest shot at Spawn and shouted, "Nice outfit, asshole," while wearing that ridiculous outfit of hers. I also had that exact thing in my notes because we talked about Jessica Priest. She looks like she's straight out of a comic book.
Yeah.
Fighting Spawn, also dressed all in black, and she makes that comment like, is it ironic? Do you a bit of a pot on the kettle black, if you ask me. Doug goes on, I love the idea of the virus being released if Martin Sheen's heart stops. Pretty brilliant plot device. Spawn's relationship with Zach and Spaz are a great way to show that he isn't just a vengeful and psychotic POS, and that he can be kind to someone who has nothing to offer him. The effects for Spawn's suit look way more convincing than the Spidey and Venom suits in Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. Now that's a hot take.
That's a hot take. Yes.
In most cases, practical effects will always look better than CGI. He closes with this. No duh. John Leguizamo rules. I assume that's how he wanted me to say that.
As we have said, when in doubt, John Leguizamo.
Excellent points, Doug. I appreciate you sending that in. I appreciate everybody who sent us in emails about Spawn and sending us your thoughts. Remember, if there is a superhero movie that you like that was poorly received upon release, tell us why you like it. Send us an email, bestoftherestpod@gmail.com. What are your favorite scenes? Who gives the best performance? We want to know. When we cover that movie, we will read your thoughts on the episode. So one of the running themes throughout those emails is that this costume looks rad. And I agree.
Yeah.
When he's fully spawned up, it looks pretty good. He spent a lot of the movie without his mask on, which I don't think is from the comics. I think in the comics, he's always spawned up whenever he spawned. But I got to imagine with how much that covers his face, it was probably, even though whenever I guess when he doesn't have his mask on, he's still covered in makeup. But I got to imagine it, with the green eyes, it probably restricts his vision and it's made it otherwise difficult to shoot. So maybe that's why he's unmasked so much. But I do like the transition of him putting the mask on, how it kind of comes on in layers. All the transitions in this movie look pretty good. So like at the end of my favorite scene with the motorcycle, whenever he goes from his motorcycle form back to regular Spawn, that transition looks really cool. Whenever Violator goes from the birthday clown to his regular clown look, he just kind of shakes his head and transforms over. It looks good. It's an effective little effect there. I like it.
Yeah, they do. They have some fun with those transitions and make them kind of memorable. We also got a couple of scene transitions here that definitely are in pulling some stuff. I don't think it's done to excess, so I think it works a little bit better here than I would say it does in something like Hulk, just to give a bit of a different flair when we're moving from scene to scene.
I thought the exact same thing because it'll like the frame will like catch on fire and fire goes across the screen to go to the next scene. And I agree, it's done sporadically, not literally every single change, and I certainly appreciated that.
Yeah, makes it feel a little bit more like a feature, not a bug.
This movie is so 90s. I would say it's 90s to the extreme with a capital X at the beginning of the word extreme and no E.
Yes.
Especially that opening. I mean, it launches right into the movie. We've got this tunnel of fire, this dramatic dialogue, lots of flashes. We get to see a look of Malibolgia really early on, really in that opening scene. I had to watch that opening twice. They dump so much information there, but
they really do.
This movie's got a tight runtime. It's about 90 minutes, and they get into it.
There's, like I said, this is a short movie, but it's going hard. There's a lot going on, a lot packed in here.
You get some nice techno music during the opening credits, which I don't think I've said the word techno since the 90s, but nice dance club music.
This soundtrack is, again, like when we watched, I think it was Fantastic Four, we talked about how that soundtrack just was like,
2005,
I guess if you were trying to define 2005, but like this soundtrack again, I'm like, I am firmly reminded this is 1997.
Got a Marilyn Manson song featured pretty prominently whenever he first comes back to Earth. That same Marilyn Manson song plays during the closing credits. After the Marilyn Manson song, you get a Filter song. Very 1997. It's actually because I watched the whole credits. Like I said, a song comes on. I didn't recognize it, but I knew it was Filter. I'm a fan of the band. I looked it up. It's actually the Crystal Method and Filter. So very, very 90s.
This soundtrack actually peaks at number 7 on the Billboard 200.
I'm not surprised. It's
Got some
hits
popular
of the
songs
time.
on it.
Yeah, got some good stuff.
It's like just looking at this list of, they're almost all collaborations. Like almost every single song is like 2 groups together, and it's just like, so it's like an electronic band, then there's like a rock person next to them, and that's definitely the vibe of this soundtrack, is a lot of that, and it's definitely
A time capsule.
a snapshot of the time. Yeah,
Even the closing credits are also extreme, the capital X, because they're like, it's all black and yellow, like a fire aesthetic, and they're going up at an angle. They don't just go straight up. They're crooked the entire time.
Yeah.
And they're crooked the other direction. It's extreme, man. I mean, everyone who watches the movie agrees. John Leguizamo, Mark Strong Award. I said early on that not every joke he makes lands, but the ones that do land, here's a few of my favorites. Whenever Al Simmons first makes it back to Earth, he goes to his wife's house, but he's like losing energy. He's about to like pass out. So he's literally crawling on the ground. And they think he's just some random homeless person. And his wife's telling him to get out of here. And her new husband's telling him to leave or call the cops. Violator's there. And he comes and steps in. And he goes, "Oh, excuse him. He had a freak accident with some Jiffy Pop." As a good one. He also he makes a lot of jokes about the way he looks. He says, well, if it ain't Curious Crispy."
Calls him Crispy a lot.
But this, I feel like I'm doing David Letterman's top 10. This is the number 1 clown joke in Spawn. They're at a cemetery, and Spawn asks, "What is this?" And Clown says, "This is where old folks go after Florida, son." Snapping my cards.
Yeah.
On the desk there. Did you just speaking of Clown though, did you notice, I think some, if not all of his dialogue maybe was ADR. I think there's definitely some lines he had to add in later. For the most part, it looks good. There was one in particular though where he stops talking, but his lips kept going. Maybe this is something they edited for the rating. I don't know what he could have said after it, but he's talking to Martin Sheen's character, and he says, "Grow up, you sniveling ninny." But his mouth keeps going after that. So maybe there's some more. I don't know.
Maybe one day we're gonna need to watch that director's cut.
Yeah, maybe they restored that. Yeah.
Who knows?
We've kind of danced around it, talked about it. Special effects get criticized. I did read that they were getting scenes delivered up to 2 weeks before the movie premiered. So,
Yikes.
like we've said before, most of the time when you see poor special effects in movie, it comes down to time and or money. I've got to imagine this was an instance of both, really. The budget was originally less than $20 million, but kept increasing as they added more special effects scene. Hell, in fact, was all made via computers to save on a shooting time. So rather than having to build sets, they cut out a week of the shooting schedule and just did the green screen and all CG hellscape. The effects, sure, they don't look amazing, but there are times when it's very effective. I think we've highlighted a few of them already. In particular, I like the final fight in the living room. The final fight is kind of broken in 2 stages. They go to hell and they fight, and then they make it back to Juana's living room. And there's a fun fight there. We get Violator in his creature form. Is that his Violator form?
His Violator form, yeah.
And it kind of goes back and forth between CG and a practical Violator puppet that really looks like a gremlin to me after they transform. And it's a fun fight. It's a nice little way to cap off the movie.
Yep. It like we have the big hellscape fight where it's basically Spawn and Cagliostro against the armies of hell that Spawn is meant to lead. But after they take out a bunch of them, but then they escape just in time before they get overwhelmed. But then Violator follows them in. They have kind of another face off, and then that's the Spawn Violator showdown. And yeah, it's a little more of a PS fight, but Spawn gets a chance to really kind of show off some of his powers and kind of finally get his chance to tell Violator who's boss. Obviously, ultimate reception of the movie aside, there's something to be said for this movie being made in the late 90s and featuring Michael J. White as the lead. Obviously, some other changes in this film were made, but having a black lead in this film, this was really the first big instance of a major comic book film starring a black lead to happen. Steel, to be fair, comes 2 weeks later. But kind of the proto form of kind of what you get with stuff like Blade in 98, all the way up to stuff that eventually comes in like Black Panther. So there's still something to be said for that. And I think that the film should be lauded for that, for putting Michael J. White front and center. He does not get top billing in this movie. John Leguizamo does, actually.
Really? That's interesting.
In the credits, it's Leguizamo, Jai White, Martin Sheen in that order. And Martin Sheen doesn't get like a and Martin Sheen or like featuring Martin Sheen. I have no idea if that's was just a random order.
The reverse order as I would expect. I would expect biggest name at top, like we've seen before with, Superman or even Batman 89. And then you've got to get your lead up there, which they do. He's second. But John Leguizamo top billing. I mean, he has a ton of screen time. He does a great performance. But John Leguizamo in 1997, was he that big of a draw? I guess
like I said, that's just the order in the intro credits. I have no idea if there's more to that or not. I don't know. But like I said, to have, and this was not a cheap film either. It's $45 million. That's, even in the late 90s, that's a significant investment. So there's still something to be said for that, for the studio backing the project. And then, like I said, obviously it continues with stuff like Blade and Steel, which I'm sure we'll get to one day.
Yeah,
still something to be lauded.
Ryan Coogler, I'm pretty sure, name dropped this movie when he was talking about kind of what forged the path for what led to Black Panther, and hopefully a lot more adaptations to come with more diversity in its cast.
Yeah.
I think that does it for Spawn Talk. I think we covered the high points. I hope we hit them all. It's interesting. I feel like we say this for every comic book adaptation in the 90s, but it's interesting and weird that this movie was made at the time that it was. Spawn, certainly popular in the comic book world at the time, but not a mainstream character by any means. But he's getting a movie before Spider-Man, before the X-Men, before Fantastic Four. They made some very interesting choices in the 90s, and we're talking about most of them.
Yeah. Not supposedly the last we've seen of Spawn on the big screen, though. Todd McFarlane, for many years, has spoken of bringing Spawn back in a film that he plans to write and direct. Some recent ish developments established that it would be a reboot starring Jamie Foxx, also featuring Jeremy Renner starring alongside Fox as Detective Twitch of the Sam and Twitch duo. That was supposed to start filming last year, but as far as I know, there's been no further updates. But just so you guys know, Spawn films will continue from McFarlane until morale improves.
Hey, I'll watch it. Listeners, we would super appreciate it if you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us tremendously, and I'm going to ask that you go one step farther. Leave a review for every podcast that you listen to regularly. They're all going to appreciate it. It helps tremendously with the algorithms and us getting found. And really, we just appreciate hearing nice things about the show. Whatever you write in that review, you can bet I'm going to read it, just like this review left by Logan Lucky. Now, Andrew, Logan Lucky, great movie. Have you watched it yet?
Nope.
Watch it. Get back to us. I expect a full report. Wonderful movie.
You're already asking me to watch one movie a week, man. Now you're asking me to watch two.
Here's what they write. A refreshing look back at the past. Though the world often thrives on negativity, this podcast takes everything in a positive direction. And honestly, who doesn't love some good nostalgia? Some movies really are terrible, but doesn't make them any less fun. Batman and Robin has been a personal favorite for years, so I was glad to hear the boys' take on it. Keep it up. Hey, we will, Logan Lucky, and thanks for listening. Glad you enjoyed the episode. Apple Podcasts is actually different for every country. So whenever I log in Apple Podcasts, at first, I only see reviews left by people in the US. However, I started checking our reviews internationally because it's not an exaggeration to say we have listeners all over the world. I was sad to see no other international reviews. So I am calling out to you, listeners in France, in the UK. Andrew, we have a listener in Ethiopia. Assuming it's not someone using a VPN specifically for Ethiopia for some reason, we get one download there every single week. So
that's awesome. Thank you,
listener in Ethiopia.
Above all, thank you for listening, listener in Ethiopia. That's what I want to make very clear here.
And I am going to pressure you into leaving us a review. I want to read it. And you know what? If English isn't your native tongue, leave the review in whatever language you're comfortable with. I am still going to read it. I will do all of the Skillshare classes that I need to make sure I read your review as best as I can. And I would love to have that challenge. So keep them coming. Keep those emails coming in. Follow us on social media. We're everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all at BOTRcast. We're on YouTube as well. You can see some fun snippets from our show, some videos that we put together with various conversations we've had on mic. It's a lot of fun over there. So follow us, subscribe, drop us a line. We want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. And remember, maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
John Leguizamo.
John Leguizamo.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. If you enjoyed our show, please share it with a friend. It's the only way we're going to grow. And follow us on Twitter at BOTRcast. Thank you. Image Comics founded by 6 or 7 artists. Andrew, you're going to know this history better. I think it was
7.
I'll just say that confidently. Image was founded by 7 artists breaking away from...
Hold on. Now I'm second guessing myself.
I want to say it was like 7, but only 6 of them ended up creating things.
Yeah. So basically there's Jim Valentino, Mark Silvestri, Eric Larson, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, and Willis Portaccio. So yes, 7, but only 6 studios get founded. So 7 people, 6 companies under one Image banner.
I might ask you, did you do that off the top of your head? Did you just name all those off the top? Oh my God. Okay. I'm going to ask you to name those again here in a second because I'm starting this over. Is it ironic? Do you coffee calling the kettle black?
Yeah.
I love the idea of the virus.
Chris, it's the pot calling the kettle black.
What did I say? Coffee?
The coffee.
Did I coffee? Thanks. I'm so glad you said something because I would have made it to the episode. Now it'll be post credits.
Yeah.